For 133 days, a single man drifted alone across the South Atlantic on a wooden raft 8 feet wide. No engine, no sail, no one to talk to. When he was finally lifted from his raft, he had survived longer alone on a raft than anyone in recorded history. And more than 80 years later, no one has ever beaten that record. His name was Poon Lim. And this is how he stayed alive. In the autumn of 1942, the war at sea was at its worst. German submarines hunted the shipping lanes in packs, and a merchant sailor's life could end in the time it took a torpedo to cross a few hundred yards of water. Poon Lim was 24 years old, a second-mess steward on a British cargo ship called the Benlomond. His job was simple and invisible, serving food, cleaning up, keeping the crew fed. He was not a hero. He was a young man far from home, doing quiet work on a slow ship. On the 23rd of November, the Benlomond was crossing the middle of the South Atlantic, alone, without escort, when the submarine found her. The torpedo struck, and the ship began to die almost immediately. In minutes, water was pouring in, and the order came to abandon ship. Poon Lim grabbed a life jacket and jumped. Behind him, the Benlomond went under, taking most of the crew with her. The explosion, the cold shock of the water, the ship folding into the sea, it was over in about 2 minutes. And then there was nothing. Just Poon Lim in a life jacket in an ocean that stretched past the horizon in every direction. He floated for 2 hours before he found it, one of the ship's wooden life rafts, drifting empty. It was a simple thing, about 8 feet square, with a low wooden rail and a few storage tins lashed underneath. He dragged himself onto it, and on that raft, he took stock of exactly what stood between him and death. There was a tin of water, around 10 gallons, a few boxes of hard biscuits, some chocolate, cans of a fatty survival paste called pemmican, a little evaporated milk, and a bottle of lime juice. To a man waiting for rescue, it might have lasted a few weeks. But rescue was the one thing Poon Lim did not have. He was in the middle of the ocean, off the shipping routes, and no one knew where he was. No one was coming to that patch of water because no one knew there was anyone left to find. So he did the thing that would keep him alive for the next 4 months. He rationed. He measured out his biscuits and his water in tiny amounts, forcing himself to eat less than his body wanted, stretching days of food into weeks. He tied himself to the raft with the length of rope so that if he slept or if a wave hit, the sea couldn't simply take him while he wasn't looking, and he watched the horizon. The first weeks were the easy ones, and he knew it. The food would run out. The water would run out. If he was still alive when that happened, he would have to feed himself from the ocean itself. So before, he was desperate. While he still had the strength to think clearly, he started to build. This is the part of the story that separates Poon Lim from almost everyone else who has ever been lost at sea. He did not simply endure. He worked. He took the small can of biscuits and worked the metal until he had a rough blade and a hook. He pulled fibers from the hemp rope on the raft and twisted them into a fishing line. He used a little of his food as bait. His first attempts failed. The line snapped, the hook bent, the fish got away. But he had time. That was the one cruel gift of his situation, and he tried again and again until the ocean finally gave him something back. He caught fish. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. What he didn't eat right away, he cut into strips and laid across the wooden rail of the raft to dry in the sun, building a small reserve against the days when the sea gave him nothing. When it rained, he caught the rainwater in his canvas and his tins in his own cupped hands, drinking his fill and saving what he could. He caught seabirds that landed on the raft, exhausted, looking for the same rest he was looking for. And once, by his own account, when a shark came close, Poon Lim did not wait to become its meal. Weak as he was, he fought it, hauled it up onto the raft and killed it, and, as he told the story, drank its blood for the moisture because he was desperate and it was there. On a raft 8 feet wide in the open ocean, a mess steward with no training in open ocean survival had turned himself into a hunter. But food and water were only half the battle. The other half was inside his own head. Imagine it, day after day of the same flat horizon, the same slap of water against wood, the same silence. No voice but your own. No news of whether the war was won or lost, whether anyone was looking for you, whether tomorrow would be any different from today. Many people in far easier situations simply give up. Poon Lim refused to. He gave himself tasks. He counted the days by tying knots and marking the raft. He swam short distances beside the raft, still roped to it just to keep his muscles working. He kept himself busy because a busy mind does not have room to drown in despair. If you're finding this story as extraordinary as I do, take a second to subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel keep telling the true stories of survival at sea that most people have never heard. Now, back to the raft. Twice, salvation came close enough to touch and passed him by. He saw ships. He watched them move across the horizon, and his heart must have leapt. And then he watched them keep going, never seeing the tiny raft and the small figure waving on it. By his own account, a freighter once came close enough that he believed the crew saw him and did not stop. Whether they truly saw him or simply never spotted him, we can't know for certain. But we know the effect on Poon Lim. The people who might have saved him were not going to. If he was going to be saved, the sea would have to carry him to it. It's worth stopping here to think about what those months actually did to him, because the physical survival is only half of what makes this story so staggering. Poon Lim was not trained for open ocean survival. He was a young man who, until a few weeks earlier, had spent his days serving meals on a ship. He had no idea how long he would be out there. Every single morning, he woke up to the same problem he'd gone to sleep with: stay alive one more day, with no promise that the day would bring anything but more ocean. Most of us have never faced a test that long or that lonely. The temptation on day 40, on day 80, on day 100 to simply stop bailing, stop fishing, stop caring. That temptation must have been enormous, and every day he refused it. He kept his little routines like they were sacred, because in a way they were. They were the difference between a man surviving and a man waiting to die. There is a detail from those months that has always stayed with people who tell this story. At one point, a submarine is said to have surfaced near his raft, possibly the very kind of vessel that had sunk his ship. Its crew looked at him, this lone figure on a scrap of wood, and did nothing to help him. Whether every version of that encounter is exact, the meaning was the same as the ships that passed him by. The world was full of people who could have saved him and would not. He was, for all practical purposes, completely alone, and he decided again and again that alone was survivable. And slowly, the sea began to carry him home. Day by day, the currents pushed his raft westward more than 700 miles across the South Atlantic toward the coast of Brazil. He didn't know that. He couldn't navigate. He only knew that he was still alive, still counting knots, still drying fish on the rail. The signs changed so gradually he might not have trusted them. A different color to the water, more birds, seaweed drifting past. The ocean was telling him land was near, in the only language it had. On the 5th of April, 1943, 133 days after the Benlomond went down, 3 Brazilian fishermen working the waters near the coast saw something strange in the distance, a small wooden raft, and on it, a man, thin and burned by the sun and salt, still alive, still waving. They came alongside. Poon Lim was so weak that he could not stand. They had to lift him off the raft that had been his entire world for over 4 months. He had lost around 20 pounds. His body was wrecked, but he was alive. And here is the measure of what he had done to himself through all those weeks of discipline and work. Within 3 days of being brought ashore at the port of Belém, Poon Lim was able to walk. He had kept his body just functional enough, right to the end, to carry himself back into the world. When the story reached the authorities, it was almost too much to believe. 133 days alone on an 8-foot raft, with no training and no help, feeding himself from the sea. King George VI ordered that Poon Lim be awarded the British Empire Medal, and his methods were held up as an example of what a person could improvise to stay alive at sea, the kind of hard-won practical knowledge that other sailors in other disasters might one day be glad someone had worked out with a biscuit tin and a piece of rope. Poon Lim survived the war. He eventually settled in the United States, and he lived a long life, a life he almost didn't have, saved not by luck, but by his own stubborn refusal to sit still and wait to die. When people asked him about the record, about being the man who survived longer alone on a raft than anyone in history, he is said to have answered with a strange, quiet modesty. He hoped, he said, that no one would ever have to break it. And no one has. In more than 80 years, through all the shipwrecks and storms and disasters since, no documented survivor has ever lasted longer alone on a raft than Poon Lim did on that patch of the South Atlantic. His record isn't a record of endurance alone. It's a record of what a person can do when they decide that the ocean does not get to make the decision for them. So here's what I'll leave you with. Most of us will never be tested the way Poon Lim was tested. But if you were, if it were you, alone on that raft on day 1, with the food already running low, do you think you would start building tools, or do you think you would start waiting? Be honest. Tell me in the comments. And if you want more true stories of people who found a way to survive when the sea had already written them off, you know what to do.